confusion, the data centers. People are making their decisions as we speak.
I wonder if Marc Short agrees with that. He of course, is the former director of legislative affairs in the first Trump White House, also former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. He's now chair of Advancing American Freedom, and he's here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio.
Nice. How y'all doing?
Always good to have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. As Joe says, our mind's made up. Now, is it a question of Labor Day, or did things need to be resolved before everybody went on their final summer vacations?
I think that the traditional thought was around Labor Day, and by that point, I think the narrative gets set in. But I think it's earlier now. I don't think there's any mystery that the number one issue since Donald Trump was elected has been affordability, and that's still the number one issue. And I think that typically in modern American history, like last 50, 60 years, the party that is out of power gains about 21 seats in the midterm. But in the situations when you have one party in control of the White House, the House, and the Senate, it's typically about 40. In the last 50, 60 years, about a 40-seat gain. And so certainly the Democrats right now have a lot of things going in their favor, and the affordability crisis remains the number one issue for American voters. The question will become, I think, how many trending socialist or near socialist candidates do the Democrats nominate that kind of curtail what could be an even bigger potentially win for them in November?
But is that your thought when you look at Wisconsin this evening? Francesca Hong, Thanksgiving, you're making it easier for us, is your thought?
I think absolutely, John. I think that, for her, I think that Tom Tiffany, if a Republican, will be a formidable candidate. And I think that she's just so far out the mainstream that they'll be giving the governor's mansion to Republicans in Wisconsin. But I think if you look in Congress, there's a continued push where there's been multiple Democratic socialists who have been nominated in the House. Right. And you have some certainly outliers in the Senate, like El Said in Michigan, that I think create a narrative for Republicans that says, look at how far crazy the Democrats have become. And the Democrats are not really popular right now, and socialism is even less popular. So even though the president's numbers are down, it seems in many cases where Democrats are offering the alternative is not really what voters are looking for either.
Well, so I've been wondering here about the kind of pattern where you're seeing, where you saw, for example, people who were Obama voters became Trump-Pence voters in 2016 after voting for Obama. Previously, maybe some of them swung back to Biden, maybe some stuck with President Trump on the economic grounds you were talking about. Could we not see that extreme swing once again if there is that kind of horseshoe theory of politics and the lines between socialism and populism maybe at sometimes blurred?
Well, Kelly, I think it's odd that in a Republican administration just a couple weeks ago we had administration talking about price gouging and needing to go after Exxon and Chevron to lower gas prices.
And he wants to take stakes in, say, AI
You have
companies.
a record number of state-owned enterprises now in a Republican administration. They obviously have huge protectionist tariffs. And so to the horseshoe theory, I remember campaigning on the campaign trail in 2016, and there were a lot of signs of Bernie Sanders, yard signs, that became Trump signs. So when Hillary defeated Bernie, those voters came over to Trump. And there's no doubt that the president is flexing more of his populist economic message as opposed to the first administration conservative. And so you make a great point, is for a lot of voters who are looking for actually the government to get out of the economy, it's not as if Republicans are offering a clear contrast right now to Democrats.
When you consider the idea of 40 seats, though, going to Democrats, we talked to Susan Del Bene yesterday. The DCCC is just adding to the battleground map, and they added 12 more seats last week. French Hill, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Mike Flood was on there. Do we get to the point where, I know history matters, but Marc Short rolls his eyes at some of these?
I do. And in some cases, when you have that much momentum and you have a lot of resources to play with, you begin placing seats that just are for news stories. So people begin thinking, the map could even be larger. I don't anticipate it being 40 because I think there's new challenges right now. For one, there's been so much redistricting that has favored Republicans mid-cycle right now that should gain Republicans a net of about 10 seats. But two, our districts are more there's fewer competitive districts today than there used to be. And so I do think that there's a lot of momentum Democrats have currently, but I think those headwinds are they're going to be shaving off some of that cap that they could have.
Well, as we consider the kind of notion of some of those districts that have been redistricting, you've been on this program before, Marc, talking about how that could actually backfire in some instances against Republicans because you're watering down districts that aren't as far deep red as they would have been otherwise. If this is even districts that are Trump plus 10. Is this a safe year to assume that a Trump plus 10 district is going to go?
No, Kelly, you're right. I think it's about a plus 10 is where you actually have the cutoff line. And you're right that, in many cases, some of those lines are redrawn were in states like Texas. In Texas, it doesn't look as strong for Republicans right now because certainly the Paxton drama is weighing down a lot of Republicans across the state. So you're exactly right. You could see some of those redrawn seats that actually end up flipping for Democrats. Having said that, I still think that the redrawing districts will be a net gain for Republicans, but potentially not as significant as they thought it would be.
I'd love to ask you about what's happening or will happen on Capitol Hill when lawmakers come back. Senate went home last weekend. Everyone's gone through August. We know the deal here. But not a lot got done. In fact, a lot of things were left on the side of the road, including the Clarity Act, which we've talked about a lot. There are questions about what the House will do with the CR when it comes back around. How much order or disorder will we see after 5 weeks on the lam?
I would encourage you to continue to think not much will get done.
Okay, then.
Just as
low expectations.
The past will be the future as well.
No shutdown, though.
I think
guessing,
particularly
right?
when you're in an election year, members are really anxious to get home and go back to campaigning. So I would anticipate you will see a CR completed at this point, which I think was a question because I think that the shutdown actually in some ways benefited Democrats before. So I think there's a lot of question of would they pursue that same political strategy. It appears not this time. It appears that we will keep the government open, which is a positive. But I don't know how much more is really going to get done. You might see the Senate pass the Clarity Act, but actually getting to reconcile the two bills and get anything past that. And I think if you're looking at a bigger reconciliation 3.0, maybe a slim chance of that in a lame duck session, but I don't anticipate you seeing that in September either.
Wow, incredible.
What about be great news for the Pentagon?
Yeah, certainly so. What about the Russia sanctions bill that the Senate passed? Huge bipartisan margin, but is that necessarily a mandate for this House?
I think that the House will support it as well, Kay. I do think you've seen Democrats who want to curtail some of the tariff authority that's provided to the president under that bill. It feels to me that's kind of specific to Russia, but I do think you'll see the House change some of the bill, but I still think you're going to see it get to the president's desk.
It's great to have you back with us, as always. I hope your summer's going well.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's almost over,
good to see
by the
you.
way.
I
still
know.
Can't get over that.
Yeah.
Marc Short, chairman, Advancing American Freedom. And, of course, in his time at the White House in the first Trump administration, he was chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence and was the director of legislative affairs, connecting both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue for us.